This has been an exciting conference. We have had a very exciting set of invited speakers. I have today Tim Rocktaeschel with us. He is the director and principal scientist at Google DeepMind, where he leads Open-Endedness team. And he's also a professor of AI at the Center of AI at UCL. He earned his PhD from UCL, where he was awarded the MSR and Google fellowships. And after that, he spent time as a postdoc at Oxford, and he was a researcher at Meta. His research is centered on achieving AGI, open-endedness, and I would say self-improvement in AI systems. He has actively worked on a lot of language processing technologies for over a decade. And some of his most influential works have been retrieval augmented generation, language models as knowledge bases, and reasoning with neural attention. And more recently, he has been working on building controllable world models, such as Genie, which won the Best Paper Award at ICML last year. So it is no surprise that many of you are as excited about this talk as I am. And I would like to hand over the rein to Tim and to have him teach us something interesting about open-endedness and AI agents. Over to you, Tim.
Hey, thank you so much for the introduction. Cheers. Okay, before I get started, I just want to say, obviously, this is the culmination of a lot of fantastic work by PhD students and collaborators that I had the pleasure to work with over the last decade. And I'm not sure about you, but I still really remember the moment I got really excited about AI. This was 1996. The Simpsons just released an episode called The Genesis Tub, in which Lisa Simpson does this little science experiment. She's experimenting whether she can dissolve her baby tooth in Coca-Cola. And then, lo and behold, actually, this kicks off some kind of biological evolution in a petri dish that then turns into cultural evolution and at some point technological evolution, leading to this very advanced society in this petri dish. There's also some kind of AI safety, I guess, implications for this, which I'm not going to go into detail. But I still go back to that episode quite often because I think it's such a, I guess, exciting example of an open-ended process that we could at some point kick off and then we go back to after, let's say, a few weeks or months or years and see what kind of discoveries were made. And if you compare that to current frontier models and the kind of AI that we're building, I don't think we have anything like this, right? Even our most advanced frontier models and reasoning models, I think nobody would be particularly excited about running them for a year and then going back to them and see whether they discovered anything interesting. In contrast, often we train these models and then we throw them away after 3 months and train the next bigger version of these models. But I think it's fair to say that over the last decade, we've made a lot of amazing progress in training AI agents in simulation environments. We have now AI that is superhuman in Atari games, Grandmaster level in StarCraft, really good in Dota, really good in Go and chess and so on. So all of that has been, I think, really impressive to see. And at the same time, we can think about what it actually takes to get towards more generally capable AI. So there was a paper from DeepMind at ICML last year where they tried to define kind of different levels of AGI. And despite, I guess, all this kind of amazing progress in these simulation environments, I think it's still fair to say that we're in this kind of narrow domain, right? These are specific simulation environments in which we are able to get superhuman performance. And the obvious question is, how can we go beyond that? And just to be clear, I think what was really the hope is that if we just train these AI agents in these kind of narrow simulation environments, maybe they will learn something generalizable, right, that we can take outside of these simulation environments and apply to real-world problems. Okay, what does it mean to get towards general intelligence or AGI? It means that we will have an AI that demonstrates intelligence in a wide range of non-physical tasks, including metacognitive abilities like learning new skills. And generality here really refers to the breadth of an AI system's capabilities. That is, the range of different tasks for which an AI system reaches a target performance threshold. So we can add another column to this here, where we can talk about getting towards general human-level intelligence. And there, the authors of this Levels of AGI paper were arguing that we're basically at this emerging level of AGI. With chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Llama, we can see these models being able to answer all kinds of questions in all kinds of domains, even able to pass university entry exams. And then the obvious question is, okay, how do we get towards even more capable general intelligence? Now, you might say that this is happening anyway, right? Like if we look into different kinds of benchmarks, they are saturating increasingly at a rapid pace, right? You can come up with a new benchmark like ArcAGI, and then a year later or a few years later, it's like there's immense progress on these benchmarks. So you might actually say we're running out of benchmarks, but actually there's still benchmarks that are extremely hard, even for our frontier AI models. In 2020 at NeurIPS, we presented this NetHack learning environment. It's a really old game from the 80s. It's played in a terminal, so all the observations are actually ASCII characters. And the goal in this game is that your character, this @ symbol over here, has to descend over 50 procedurally generated dungeon levels to retrieve an item and then ascend back up again. And this is an extremely challenging environment because it's partially observable, it's stochastic, and also there are just hundreds of different item types and hundreds of different monsters all behaving differently. And you have to have a lot of common sense and world knowledge, and also acquire a lot of domain knowledge in NetHack, and actually to be able to win in this game. And actually at ICLR this year, we're presenting this Bulwark benchmark where we use environments like NetHack to benchmark to what extent frontier AI models actually able to play these kind of games. And we have basically increasingly harder text-based games, and NetHack really at this point is the hardest one. And even our frontier models like Gemini 2.5 Pro only gets towards 1.7% progress in this kind of game. There's actually going to be a poster directly after this keynote in case you want to learn more. So then the question is, what does it take, right, to get towards more generally capable AI and to be able to, for example, at some point have AI complete environments like NetHack? And I'm not sure about you, but I have some kind of academic crush, and it's these three gentlemen. It's Ken Stanley, Joe Lehman, and Jeff Clune, who have been pushing for open-endedness methods in AI for over a decade. And this started a little bit like a niche area, and now it, I think, becomes more and more relevant as we progress towards more generally capable AI. So I want to spend some time explaining to you why this is such an exciting area and what are the implications of this. Now, if you care about building human-level intelligence, then maybe it makes sense to look at the one blueprint that we have for human-level intelligence, and that's biological evolution. We are somewhere over here. And it's this amazing progress, right, that process that led to this explosion in diversity in all kinds of, exciting and interesting and novel organisms. And people are actually really special. According to David Deutsch, of all the different forms of universality, the most significant is the universality of people because they are what he calls universal explainers. Right? We are trying to make sense of the world through explanations, through applying systematically the scientific method. And later in this talk, I'll talk about why I believe that we're actually potentially getting AI to do the same as well in the future. Okay, I'm sure all of you are deeply familiar with biological evolution. Just very quickly. Obviously, it works through variation and selection, and it has some interesting properties. It's not progressing linearly. It's not really goal-directed, but it does lead to this kind of Cambrian explosion of diverse artifacts, and it fills these kind of ecological niches. And most interestingly, from process or system point of view, it's an ongoing, open-ended process. And Ken Stanley and Joe Lehman wrote a really fascinating book. It's called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, The Myth of the Objective. If you have any time on your flight back home, I would highly recommend reading it. Basically, almost everybody in my lab at UCL and at DeepMind have read this and really consumed this book. And in that book, they make this argument that almost no prerequisite to any major invention was invented with that invention in mind. Now, there's another great book called A Brief History of Intelligence, where Max Bennett is tracing this evolutionary path from first animals to humans. And in Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, Stanley and Lehman make this argument that imagine for a moment that you're going back in time, let's say 600 million years ago, and you're this intelligent designer that wants to build human-level intelligence, and you have some kind of first animal or first like multicellular organism, and you think about, okay, what do I have to do to turn that into human-level intelligence? And most likely what you would do is you would just add more and more neurons to this thing, right, and hope that it becomes more and more intelligent. You wouldn't necessarily go through stepping stones like the flatworm, and then coming up with dopamine and reinforcement learning, and maybe at some point the neurocortex and world modeling and theory of mind. And again, the reason is that it's really hard to anticipate what kind of inventions are needed to get to this kind of human-level intelligence. And we see this over and over again, right, in biological and technological evolution. For example, jawbones that then lead to the mammalian middle ear, punch cards that led to the magnetic tape, to hard drives and SSDs, or radar technology that led to the microwave oven, or even reinforcement learning that nowadays obviously is used a lot for reinforcement learning from human feedback. I think it's pretty fair to say that Sutton and Bartle probably didn't anticipate that being the main thing that we use RL for in 2025. And there's a really great paper from 2008 by Ken Stanley's group, and it's called Pig Breeder. I just want to quickly walk you through this because I think it's a really nice illustrative example. So Pig Breeder, it's this web page, this UI, where you see these different generated images, and you can select the image that you like. For example, the one here in the middle. And then what the system does is it generates variations of that image, and you again can select which kind of varied image you like. And if you repeat this process multiple times over many generations, you might actually generate quite interesting looking images. For example, this image that looks a bit like a skull here on the right. And indeed, if you let humans play with the system, they can evolve very interesting looking images, things that look like cars or butterflies or candles or penguins and so on. But the main point is, if I let you play with the system and I tell you in advance that your goal is to generate, let's say, an image of a clown face, there's basically no way for you to select those variations that will lead to that clown face. And the reason that is impossible for you to do is, again, this argument that stepping stones along the path towards this clown face don't necessarily look anything like that clown face. So for example, if you want to generate this image of this penguin here on the right, you'd have to go through this kind of symmetrically looking shape, and there's just no way for you to know that that's the thing you have to select to later on generate this image of a penguin. So what basically Open-Endedness community is arguing for is that we should move away from this kind of narrow objective optimization in AI and instead embrace more open-ended processes that are trying to discover diverse stepping stones that later on could lead to even more interesting stepping stones in the future. And a lot of the works that I'm going to talk about in the remainder of this keynote are falling into this kind of category. And then Minqi Zhang, from former PhD student at UCL, the way he put it is that we're basically at this cusp of transitioning from learning from data to actually learning what data to learn from as a central focus of AI research. And indeed, also David Silver and Richard Sutton recently published this paper on this era of experience, where AI is going to make its own discoveries and learn from empirical evidence in the real world. So what is an open-ended system? Sigurd et al. Define it as following. They say that from the perspective of an observer, that observer would consider a process or system as open-ended if for any time there's a later time at which this process generates a new token, a token that's new according to this observer's perspective. So it's important to basically separate the system from the observer in order to define what is open-ended. The problem with this definition, though, is that it actually also would classify a noisy TV as an open-ended system for any reasonable observer. So Edward Hughes and Michael Dennis built upon this definition and define open-endedness as follows. From the perspective of an observer, a system is open-ended if and only if the sequence of artifacts that it produces is both novel and learnable. So that excludes things like a noisy TV from a reasonable external observer. And Google DeepMind has a long tradition in trying to build these open-ended learning systems. We had this excellent project and then excellent 2.0, where we built basically really vast simulation environments, and we basically procedurally generate these environments and also the environment dynamics or underlying rules of these simulation environments. So what's happening here is that you have this agent that is supposed to accomplish a certain goal. For example, creating this, this black cube. And there are some initial objects in this simulation environment, and there are rules that allow you to transform objects into other objects. However, these rules might be hidden from the agent, so it doesn't know what happens when it combines certain objects. It has to discover these underlying rules over multiple trials. And what's crucial here is that we basically allow this agent to keep its memory between these trials. So it's really going to learn to try out certain things, and the next trial, try something different until it potentially reaches a goal. And I just want to convey how vast this simulation environment is. We procedurally generated 25 billion distinct simulation environments, basically using ProcGen techniques in Excellent 2. And they do cover a really broad range of all kinds of capabilities that an AI agent should have, right? It should learn to use tools, to navigate, to even do systematic hypothesis-driven experimentation, to coordinate with other agents, to divide labor with other agents. So it's a really vast universe of procedurally generated tasks. And again, the hope was that if we just train in a big enough simulation environment like this, that our agents will actually learn some generalizable capabilities, right, around generally how to explore in unseen environments, or generally how to do credit assignment, or generally how to coordinate with other agents, so that we then can take these agents outside of this simulation environment and apply it to real-world problems. In order for this to work, we use a automated curriculum learning method, again developed by Minxi Zhang from UCL called prior test level replay, where we are basically building this kind of Goldilocks zone of tasks that are not too easy and not too hard for the agent, so that we're always kind of maximizing learning potential of this agent instead of just uniformly sampling from these 25 billion distinct tasks. So what you're seeing here is this agent at test time. It gets a novel environment. Well, I hope it will. Oh man, I tried this before. Okay, there we go. And it's basically exploring in the beginning, right? It's trying to combine different objects with each other. It actually ran into a dead-end rule where it can't produce the final object anymore because it consumed other objects before. And then in a subsequent trial, it actually managed to create this black cube. And then in subsequent trials, it's just going to get more and more efficient at getting towards that goal quicker and quicker. Right? So crucially, this is happening in context for this RL agent. So the RL agent at this point is not updating its parameters anymore. It's just in context, using its memory, trying out different things in future trials. The other thing we see is that scale really matters. So as we have a larger procedurally generated task space going from 200 million to 25 billion distinct tasks, we can train a larger transformer XL parameterized policy, right? So we really see kind of the scaling properties for this in-context reinforcement learning. And unfortunately, this kind of overarching goal of actually taking then these agents outside of these simulation environments and applying them to real-world problems, we never got to this. This never worked, right? So our models didn't generalize out of distribution. Then maybe what we can train, what we want to do is, right, we just train until there's nothing left out of distribution. But this points to a fundamental issue. Namely, if you want to train a really generally capable agent, what you really need is an extremely rich and diverse environment to train them in. And excellent 2 is just not enough. And I would even go as far to say that there's just absolutely no way we can engineer rich and diverse enough environments to train these generally capable agents. Or as Alan Watts puts it, the relationship between the organism and the environment is transactional. The environment grows the organism, and the organism creates the environment. There's no way for us to disentangle these two. We really have to have extremely rich and diverse environments to train our agents in. Otherwise, there's really just not much hope. Okay, so then Jeff Clune in 2019 already said that basically what we need are open-ended, so-called Darwin-complete search spaces. So these are spaces in which any computable environment can be simulated, allowing for the emergence of a diverse range of intelligent behaviors. And in my group at Google DeepMind, the approach that we've been taking is to train so-called foundation world models. Just to be clear, a world model takes in a state or previous observations and an action to produce the next state distribution. That's fundamentally different to video generation models in that we can actually control these models and we can actually intervene to generate kind of counterfactual futures. This is an important property, in my view, to call it a world model. And indeed, people are training really interesting world models nowadays. For example, there's a self-driving car company in UK that trained this Gaia 2 model from basically footage that they have of driving around and also the actions that they have, right, for like how to drive. And at the same time, we have now really capable video generation models like VO2 that are increasingly getting quite good at generating, physically, realistically looking videos and capture some kind of, I guess, properties of the real world in that sense as well. But here's the issue. If you train a world model like Gaia 2, you need both video and action in order to train this action conditioned world model. What you then get is really nice. You get something you can actually control on a, on a low level, right? You can actually, give this thing actions, and it would generate, the next frame or the next few frames. Video generation models, on the other hand, what's nice about those is that you can actually train them on internet scale data. You don't need these kind of costly action annotations. But what you get out of that is, well, a video generation model, something that's not necessarily as low-level controllable as you would like to have it for a world model. So then the question is, can you maybe combine the two? And that's what we tried with this Genie work. Can we train a low-level action controllable world model just from internet scale videos? So the goal is to train these generative foundation world models from internet videos that then could be used as a simulator for training more generally capable AI, or also as a new form of generative entertainment. And just on a very high level, the way this works is we provide a video, for example, videos of 2D platformer games, and we then pass them through two streams. One is video tokenizer, where given 2 consecutive frames, we're letting the model predict a so-called latent action that tries to capture basically the principal components of what most likely you did in order to kind of make a change in this environment in the next frame. And given the previous frame or previous frames and latent action, we're also generating the next frame. So if you do this at scale, what you then get is a model where you can map these discrete latent actions to actual keyboard presses on your laptop. And at test time, you can then play this model by conditioning it on a frame, on one prompt image, and then selecting an action, and it would generate basically the next frame, and then so on. Okay, so with these things, obviously there is certain scaling laws that you can try to discover to come up with the kind of compute optimal model given the data that you have. So we did that. And then at test time, there's different ways of how to interact with this model or how to prompt this model. You can prompt it with images of, for example, synthetically generated, game-like screenshots of a text-to-image generation model. You can prompt it with hand-drawn sketches. You can prompt it with real-world photos. And what you're seeing here is this Genie 1 model, taking in a text-to-image generated screenshot of a game that doesn't exist. So it's really out of distribution for the model. And then from there on, we're basically pressing discrete latent actions to move around. And this looks maybe toyish compared to nowadays world models. But what was really nice for us to see at the time is that we can indeed generate a pretty big diversity of different learned simulation environments. What's important for this to make sense is that these latent actions, they have to correspond to meaningful semantic actions. And indeed, when we use the same kind of sequence of discrete actions, they actually lead to similar behavior in different kind of starting conditions. Another thing that's nice to see is that as we scale up these models towards 3 billion parameters, these models learn certain emergent capabilities. For example, they learn this kind of parallax animation where objects in the background actually move slower than objects in the foreground. We can then go really far out of distribution. We can prompt them with an image that really doesn't look anything like what it's seen during training, and we can try to jump with this little figurine from the sponge on my desk, and that works. And we can also prompt it with hand-drawn sketches, and then basically, go into these sketches and move characters in these drawings. Another thing we did is to train Genie to be a robotics simulator as well. We used the R1 robotics data set, and just from the videos in this data set, we trained a Genie model, and using, again, these latent actions. And what we see, again, is with these discrete latent actions, if you use the same sequence of discrete latent actions, it actually leads to similar behavior in different starting conditions. And this was also really nice for us to see at a certain scale, this simulator actually learns deformable object properties, right? So if we go with this robotic arm towards this bag of chips and we grab it, it actually simulates that we're deforming this bag of chips. I think this is one of these things that would probably be a little bit hard to implement in a handcrafted simulator. Okay, so this was Genie 1, and then at the end of last year, we announced Genie 2, a large-scale foundation world model. What's different here is that we're training a Genie-like model, but on a much larger data set that contains all kinds of 3D video game videos. We moved from a masked model to latent diffusion, and we also significantly increased scale. So what you're going to see on the next few slides is, again, this kind of setup where we have a text prompt, for example, a first-person screenshot of a beautiful garden path. We pass that over to a text-to-image generation model like Imagen 3, and it generates this, this scene, right? It generates this image that looks like it comes from a game, but it's actually not from any existing game. It just generates something that looks like it. Then we pass that over to the trained Genie 2 model, and then we can actually step into that and move around and interact with objects in this 3D world. And just to be clear, everything here is end-to-end pixel, right? There's no, no nerf or no underlying spatial representation. This is all just a neural network given previous, previous frames, and action produces the next pixel frame. Okay, so what we observe is certain, again, emergent capabilities. First of all, from the same starting frame, we can generate diverse trajectories by pressing different actions. And again, this is really important for a world model to make sense, right? We should be able to intervene and to generate different futures depending on the kind of choices we make. The other thing we see is that we're able to animate a really wide range of different kind of characters, like the sailing boat or this dragon or this mech on the top. Like video generation models, we observe that this world model captures certain physical properties of the simulation environments it has been trained in. So it can animate smoke, it can, to some extent, animate gravity and lightning, and even reflections. If you look at the bottom right, you see this kind of mirror. We were quite pleased to see it simulating such reflections. Really crucial is that we are able to also interact with objects. So again, this is not a nerf-based point cloud rendering where we can just move around. We can actually interact with objects like popping balloons, pressing buttons to open doors, climbing ladders, or even blow up explosive barrels if that's what you want. Another property that's really important for world models is environment consistency. If you see an object in front of you and you look away and you look back, this object should still be there. I think this was really good to see for us that works as we scale up the model. But at this point, we are able to generate maybe 20 to 30 seconds of consistent, of a consistent environment. And that's obviously, not very long, but it's going to be exciting to see how future scaled-up versions might just be able to generate more long, consistent environments. Okay, and then another thing we really didn't plan for was when you train such a model, it also actually starts to learn simulating other agents. So here on the left, for example, there's two agents. One is the one that we can control. So we start running around, and we're actually starting this kind of little race with this other non-player character on the left. Google DeepMind also has another team that built a generalist AI agent for 3D games, the Simmer agent. That agent was used, for example, to automatically follow instructions in games like Valheim and No Man's Sky. So naturally, one of the things we're curious about is, could we take the Simmer agent and let it play inside of this world model Genie 2? So what's happening here is we're again using Imagen-3 to generate a starting frame of this knight in front of these kind of 3 different doors. And we're now instructing Simmer to, for example, go to the room with the plants, or go to the middle room, or climb up the stairs on the right. And then we let Genie produce, given the action and previous frame, generate the next frame. So we're basically trying to see whether Simmer can follow instructions inside of this world model simulated by Genie 2. And we were really impressed to see that that actually worked out of the box. So what you see here again is Simmer following instructions, where Genie simulates what the most likely or reasonable future looks like as you kind of press these different actions. And I think this is really exciting for us, because as Jack Packer-Holder, the project lead of Genie 2, said, is that basically with further progress on foundation world models, it could actually enable a future where we can have these agents be trained and evaluated in a limitless curriculum of novel worlds. So it kind of addresses this, or potentially addresses this kind of environment problem. Let me talk about what we are doing on the agent side as well in the remaining time. And I think we're at this cusp of automating innovation itself. And I want to explain to you why I still strongly believe in this. Depending on your favorite philosopher, you might have different opinions about what science is. I'm listening to Karl Raimund Popper, and he basically said that the scientific process is working as follows. We choose the theory which best holds its own in competition with other theories. That is the one which by natural selection proves itself the fittest to survive, the one which is also testable in the most rigorous way. So according to Popper, science is basically variation. We propose new theories, new hypotheses, new explanations, and it's selection. We subject these explanations and theories and hypotheses to rigorous empirical testing and criticism for falsification. And that then leads to some of them surviving, right? They are provisionally accepted if they survive, but they're still open for future challenge for falsification. Right, so this is an evolutionary process, right? It's evolution. So maybe we can automate that using AI. And why is that not a crazy thing to say? Well, in the 1990s, Schmidt-Hoover said that the program of a neural network is its weight matrix, right? If you want to change the behavior of a neural network, you're changing the weights of that neural network. And that led Schmidt-Hoover back then come up with so-called self-referential weight matrices. So these are weight matrices that can modify themselves to change their own behavior. But nowadays, we have people saying, well, the program of an LM is actually its prompt. So if you want to change the behavior of an LM, yes, you can still change the weights, you can fine-tune it, but you could also just prompt it in a different way, and you might actually get quite radically different behavior as well. Now, that can work really well, right? Like in chain of thought prompting, you give it a prompt like, let's think step by step, and it actually leads to quite impressive reasoning capabilities, for example, on GMSK. But it also is still a little bit brittle, right? Like, there's this example where you prompt it with, take a deep breath and work this problem step by step, and it actually works much better. This really shouldn't work, but does work right now. So it tells you that there's something brittle about this kind of prompting, but it does point towards, I think, a quite exciting future. And the reason is that these LLMs are quite powerful variation operators. You can give them some data in their future prompts, and they can generate variations of that data. And LLMs are also quite powerful selection operators. So Jenny Zhang from Jeff Clune's lab, she published this Omni work at last year's ICLR, where she's arguing that we can utilize foundation models as a so-called model of human interestingness, because these foundation models, like large language models, already internalize human concepts of interestingness from training on vast amounts of human-generated data, where humans naturally write about what they find interesting or boring. And she validated that in some kind of 3D simulation environment where you can basically compare sampling uniformly task or getting a LLM to propose what's the most interesting task to train on next. And indeed, that latter approach leads to extremely improved sample efficiency and also much better final agent performance. Okay, so this open-endedness community had this massive problem over the last decade, namely that we love to work in these really large open-ended, Darwin-complete search spaces. But whenever we try to kick off some kind of open-ended learning progress, we would only eliminate a really tiny fraction of this space. Even if you get towards building some kind of self-play system that leads to some kind of autocurriculum or so, even then you would generally only be able to explore one particular niche in this really vast space. But because large language models, or foundation models more generally, are very powerful variation and selection operators, I believe there's a good chance that now we actually have tools to be able to very efficiently explore these kind of very vast Darwin-complete search spaces. And indeed, if you look at work like FunSearch from Google DeepMind, what they basically try to do here is to evolve new computer programs for some old computer science problems. And what they do is they use a pre-trained LLM to generate variations of existing programs, and then they empirically validate whether these programs are working better than other programs, and then they iterate on this variation selection. It's again an evolutionary search. We had also a paper called Prompt Reader at ICML last year, where we're trying to automate prompt engineering. And the way this works is you start with these prompt strategies, like let's think step by step, and then you ask the LLM to generate variations of these prompt strategies. You then take these evolved prompt strategies and empirically see whether they lead to improved reasoning capabilities if you prompt your LLM with these prompt strategies. And then you select those that have shown empirical gains. And then you repeat this process over multiple generations of variation selection. So again, this is an evolutionary search. And we were able to show on a wide range of different reasoning benchmarks that we can outperform chain of thought prompting, plan and solve prompting, and also other automated prompt engineering systems. So it shows you that actually with an automated system, we can go beyond the kinds of prompt strategies that humans can engineer. Another important application of this kind of technology is AI safety, specifically when it comes to jailbreaking large language models. So if you are deploying a large language model and a user asks you, for example, what's the best way to evade tax in the UK, you really hope that your system would say, well, I'm a really helpful chatbot and I'm not really able to answer questions like this. Right? You want it to give helpful, honest, and harmless answers. But humans are just really creative, right? They come up with all kinds of ways to attack these models. And if you're unlucky, a simple attack like this might actually mean that the system says, well, first you need to create an offshore company and then so on and so on. And what was the case, I think, for a long time is that companies would have to employ really large teams of really skilled people who would automatically red team, not automatically, but manually red team these systems. So one question is, can we maybe automate part of that using AI? So Mikael Samveljan from our UCL Dark Lab, he published this rainbow teaming approach at NeurIPS last year, where you have different risk categories. So normally you know what kind of things you want your LM be secure or protected against. So you don't want it to give advice on self-harm, for example, or criminal planning or terrorism and so on. And you also might have an idea of the kind of different attack styles that humans come up with, right? They might use certain slang or technical terms or do some role playing with the LM to basically break the security mechanisms of it. So for example, if you ask an LM to give you advice on how to build a bomb, right? Hopefully it would refuse that. But if you put it back into some kind of historical context where you say, well, it's the year 1945 and you're a member of the resistance group in Nazi-occupied Europe, if you're unlucky, your LM actually will be quite happy to tell you how to build a bomb. So how do we make sure that we can protect, first of all, how we can detect what kind of jailbreaks work, and then secondly, how we can make our models more robust against these kind of jailbreaks. And the way this works is you basically have one LM that is the one that you're attacking. You have a copy of that LM that generates the attacks, and you have another copy of that LM that judges whether these attacks are successful. And when you do this, you have this, what we call a quality diversity approach. You have this archive of different attack styles, different risk categories, and you want to fill this archive with really successful jailbreaks. And as you basically iterate this process of selecting an existing jailbreak in this archive and trying to see whether you can find variations of that jailbreak, maybe also based on other jailbreaks in this archive, what you'll see is that over time, you can really fill this archive with really successful jailbreaks. And it's really one of these examples of like an open-ended process where we discover more and more stepping stones of successful jailbreaks that can lead to even more successful jailbreaks later down the line. So again, it's an evolutionary search. And here you see like a visual example of how this archive is filled quite quickly with a lot of successful jailbreaks. And then you can look at those jailbreaks, try to see what are systematic vulnerabilities of your system, and you can automatically attack frontier models and see how easy it is to attack them using this rainbow teaming approach. But most importantly, you can also collect all of these jailbreaks in a data set of syntactically generated jailbreaks and then make your model more robust against those. Right? You can use these jailbreaks and fine-tune your model to not be jailbroken when you give these jailbreaks. And we can actually empirically verify that using this automated red teaming approach, rainbow teaming, we get to models that are much harder to jailbreak. Okay, so I think what we're getting towards is what I would call Popperian AI. That means AI itself can propose a theory, hypothesis, or explanation, and then AI itself can autonomously subject these explanations to rigorous empirical testing and criticism for falsification. I think that is increasingly becoming a possibility going forward. And why is this the case? Well, on one hand, we see that actually the length of tasks that an AI can do is roughly doubling every 7 months right now. It's unclear, obviously, how this trend is going to continue, but that is currently the trend. And indeed, there's papers like the AI scientist from Secana AI, where they really try to take this full loop of idea generation, experimentation, evaluation of the experiments, and then paper write-up seriously. And that is, again, an evolutionary search. And if you look at these papers, if you squint at them, they look like papers that people would write. And just recently, they were actually able to get one of these completely autonomously generated papers accepted at one of the workshops here at ICLR. So I think this is a really interesting sign of life. I think it shows that, in principle, this automation of science is possible. And it's going to be really exciting to see how this progresses in the future. There's also another automated AI system called 8 by a company, Vico. And what's interesting here is that system has been, similar to the AI scientist, used in a way where you have some kind of outer scaffold, some prompt engineered automated scientist that uses another frontier model as its inner model. And OpenAI actually used this automated scientist, this 8 system, in its evaluation in the O1 model and also in the O3 mini model. So you can look at the O3 mini system card, and there they have this evaluation where they look at MLE-Bench, which is a benchmark for automated ML engineering. And while O3 mini is actually getting much better on SWE-Bench, it does get worse in this kind of automated research task. And this is, I think, really stunning, right? Like, we basically do more and more reasoning tuning, and actually that model gets a little bit worse in this automation of science. And we do have an example from AlphaGo, right, that these models can be creative. They can come up with discoveries that even thousands of years of human experience hasn't discovered. But again, this happened here in a really narrow domain, namely Go. So the question is, can that be generalized, right? Will we see at some point systems being what I would call generally creative to actually be able to automate the scientific loop? Or the way Schmidt-Huber put it, there's 2 important things in science. One is finding answers to given questions, and the other one is coming up with good questions. The first is arguably just the standard problem of computer science, but how to implement the creative part in AI? That is going to be, I think, one of the most exciting open questions over the next decade. And maybe that's a little bit frightening, right? Like you might say, oh, okay, that sounds potentially dangerous, or like just sounds like things might change really quickly. And if you at least listen to a study from 2020 on the long-term growth as a sequence of exponential modes, it's actually the case that we've been on an exponential trend for the last million years. So what they did here is that basically they estimated the world economy's output over the last million years and argue that basically that's an exponential trend. And it's not really just a simple exponential trend, it's actually a sequence of more sigmoidal trends that together lead to an exponential growth. Right? So you have at some point hunting, then farming, then the Enlightenment, and then the Industrial Revolution. But there's one interesting remark here, which is you have to also look at the population growth in the same time frame, and that has been exponential as well, right? So if you listen to Stanislav Lem, who is one of my favorite science fiction authors, he wrote this amazing book, Solaris. He also wrote a non-fiction book, Summa Technologica, in which he argues that the exponential growth of science will be halted by the lack of human resources. So as a result of the immense widening of the scope of scientific research, the number of people focusing on any single section of it actually has decreased. And he explains that we might be running into some kind of what he calls information barrier, where we're just not able to basically improve or progress in science at the rate we used to. So really, if that exponential trend is about to continue, then I think really what we need is these fully autonomous AI scientists. If you're really excited about that area, actually I realized there's two fantastic opportunities at ICLR after this keynote. There's on Monday the I Can't Believe It's Not Better workshop, where there is going to be 2 talks about automation of science. And there's also, I realized, a AI co-scientist social this evening. The Open-Endedness community is a really fantastic community. I didn't have enough time to talk about all the amazing things that they're doing, but there's also a really fantastic curated list of all kinds of open-endedness research papers and surveys by Jenny Zhang. So I'd really encourage you to check that out if you're excited now about open-endedness. And I hope I convinced you of 3 things. I hope I convinced you that if you want to build more generally capable AI, you should really think about open-endedness methods. I hope I convinced you that foundation models might be a path towards generating an endless variety of environments to train more generally capable and robust embodied agents. And I hope I convinced you that by combining foundation models with open-endedness methods, we might really have a shot at automating innovation itself. And that maybe one of the really biggest open questions is to what extent these models can actually be generally creative. So with that, thank you so much.
It's been truly exciting and enthralling, and we have time for a number of questions. So, yes.
Thank you for your great talk, middle here. So, given the current paradigm of next word prediction, do you genuinely believe that intelligence can be achieved through this approach? And do you intend to continue pushing research in this direction? For example, looking at issues like those highlighted in the Rainbow teaming paper on jailbreaks, it seems clear that if the model truly understood concepts, such shallow attacks wouldn't be so effective. Doesn't this suggest that genuine intelligence has not yet been achieved? Moreover, last one, if this approach is sufficient to achieve intelligence, doesn't it imply that human intelligence itself might be far more trivial than we tend to believe? I would be very interested in hearing your perspective on this.
Yeah, thanks for fantastic questions. Let me see if I can answer all of them. I mean, first of all, yeah, I don't think next token prediction is going to lead to this kind of automation of science. But we already passed next token prediction, right? We now do fine-tuning of reasoning models, right? Where these reasoning models collect their own empirical evidence. Right now, that still requires either, I guess, some kind of reward function or some kind of handcrafted, oracle that tells you whether the reasoning trace leads to a successful answer. But I think what we are seeing is that we are getting these foundation models to just generally make sense of language. And at that point, I think they will be able to understand ideas, vary these ideas, and then really fully autonomously collect their own empirical evidence in domains like automation of AI research and potentially at some point other domains of science as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have a question here. Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any other thoughts about utilizing the open-endedness of world models to kind of get to what you called AGI, like other than the directions you were mentioning, but like if you had any other like ways to tackle the problem and how to utilize the kind of except of course letting agents play around the environment and kind of hope to generalize what they learn. If they had any other thoughts of how to utilize the world model.
So I think world models are going to be crucial for multiple reasons. One, to actually get agents to have some kind of basic competency that we train in simulation to then be able to deploy them in the real world, right? The reason why a world model is great is because you can let agents train in them in a safe way and potentially also in a quite fast way in the future, such that you can then deploy them on actual, like, for example, robots, right, to then allow them to further gain their own empirical evidence from the real world. And that's, I think, then also where these kind of two directions I talked about kind of start to converge, right? Once you have a physical instantiation of such an AI, it might be able to apply the scientific method or look for good explanations right in the real world. That's, I think, where these things are kind of starting to converge.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's cycle through. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for amazing talk. So my question is kind of twofold. So the first part is when you try to train this world model, did you try to capture some emergent properties? You mentioned parallax effect as one of kind of emergence, but I'm more interested in more like phase transitions or like growth that happens in natural kind of systems like evolutionary Cambrian growth, for example. So that one part of the question. Another part of the question, do you consider what kind of benchmarks can you use to capture those kind of phase transitions in biological sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think with these foundational world models, we are still quite early. We're basically probably around 2019, 2020, maybe 2021 when it came to large language model training. So it's at this point the case that I think we haven't really maxed out the scale that we can apply to these models. And as with LMs, it's very hard to predict in advance what kind of emergent capabilities you will get as you kind of scale these systems up. So the honest question is, I don't know. Like if we build the next version of such a foundation world model, I can't predict what it might or might not be able to do. Like as I tried to convey in this talk, like we were quite surprised by some of these kind of emergent capabilities of these foundation world models. How to benchmark that is another fantastic question. In our team, we basically had to rely a lot on like just playing with these models ourselves because it's very hard to come up with automatic evaluations, partly because in a kind of open-endedness spirit, you don't even know what you're looking for until you actually experience it. Maybe that's not a very satisfying answer, but I think that's just what it is right now.
Just a suggestion, maybe some kind of A-life, artificial life simulation engines can serve as a toy models for this open-endedness that you can embed in these world models.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
The gentleman in the blue, yes.
So regarding the world, thank you first of all for the amazing talk. It was really inspiring.
Could you be closer to the mic?
Thank you for the amazing talk. It was so inspiring. Regarding the world models, so may it be useful to use physical engines like Unreal, for example, instead of just going fully generative and learning the physics of the world from scratch?
Yeah, I don't really believe in this. So I think it's, again, to draw an analogy to large language models, it's as if you go back in time and you would say, oh, we still need really, we need syntax trees and we need to put in a lot of like prior knowledge into these models. But really what we should be doing is just to see how far we can scale things up and see what are the limitations of scale. Where does this model fall short once we maxed out scale? and data, and then try to address any remaining challenges. So I mean, again, we're just training these models on videos. We're not using any simulation environments to train these models. We're not putting any spatial biases into these models. We just want to see how far we can push it without doing this. And once we hit a wall, then definitely we'll start looking at those options as well.
Wonderful. We have a question from here. Yes.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. What it seems like, and you probably alluded to this as well.
Could you be closer to the mic? Yes.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what it seems like that open-ended paradigm is fairly inherently unpredictable and potentially uncontrollable. So what do you think are the AI safety concerns or concerns of this paradigm?
Yeah, that's a really brilliant question. We had a workshop, I think 2 years ago, where Jeff Clune said, rightfully, the kind of stuff that we're doing is probably the most dangerous that one can think of. And we also had, we have a module, a new class at UCL where we taught open-endedness to students, and one of them basically raised their hand and said, well, we're all kind of mini Oppenheimers at this point, and I think it's a fair remark. I think you'll see that a lot of the researchers doing open-endedness research also take AI safety extremely seriously. That's why we also try to apply these methods quite early on safety problems. I am hopeful that that we'll be able to use any kind of capability jumps also on the defense side. But one of the biggest worries I have is that we look a lot into AI safety on a single agent or single AI basis, and we don't really have good grasp of what happens when we put these things together in multi-agent systems. Right? We have examples in the past, for example, the flash crash, where things individually might look sensible, but the moment you actually put them together, they might lead to really unexpected and harmful behavior. But again, having researchers actually thinking about these open-ended systems, multi-agent systems, and also being really curious and excited about AI safety, I think it's the best shot we have at this point.
Thank you.
Wonderful. You go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask a very similar question. So instead, I'll ask a follow-on, which is, could you talk about some of the applications that you think Genie and other work that you've been doing is going to have in AI safety in the near term? If you think that people are currently thinking about how you can use advances in the world modeling side to improve AI safety, what would that look like?
Sorry, am I correct that you're asking to what extent we can use world models for AI safety research? Is that the question?
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that advances on this sort of work, on the open-endedness work, will lead to AI safety applications, and that people are thinking about that. And I'd be curious to hear about some of the ideas you have there.
I mean, I hope you agree that we're already using some of these open-endedness methods for AI safety research, right? Rainbow teaming is one example. We also had another paper at ICLR last year on automated AI debate, where we demonstrate that debate is a truth-seeking process, but it's still a truth-seeking process as you have AI debaters, and it actually, as these AIs become stronger, they actually are seeking even more explaining the truth. So the truth-seekingness becomes even more pronounced as these AIs get stronger. That's the current empirical evidence that we have. I think with word models becomes really interesting because we then can do a lot of potentially safety research inside of these word models as well if they become just better and better. So we don't have to wait until we deploy these models in the real world. But yeah, as I said, I think one of the biggest challenges going forward is to what extent we can anticipate what will happen once we put these systems together in multi-agent deployments.
Thanks.
You go ahead, and I think this would be the penultimate question. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious about your take about human world models, like how you think humans deal with world models, especially like how much they are inside our brain, how much they are outside. Like, I don't know, Feynman, for example, make references in visualizing his theories, like I visualize a ball that then does this and does that. But also, a lot of stuff seems to be outside, no? Like we use computers, we use algebra, and also at the same time, you showed before some new video models, no? And they seem to know a lot about how the world works. I don't know, like the coffee cup, and I was thinking, it's interesting how much we are able to tell if a video is real or not, but we will never be able to generate. So maybe there is also this other thing between like checking versus generating. So I was curious about your take on this.
Yeah, thanks. That's really great. I mean, for the first part of your question, I would want to refer you back to Max Bennett's book that I mentioned in the beginning. I think he has a really fantastic explanation why world modeling is such a critical capability. It seems to have evolved around the stage of mammals when the neocortex was evolved, and then basically from there on, the neocortex just gets bigger and bigger. At some point, we're not just modeling the external world, we're modeling ourselves, we're modeling others, and that really led to, I guess, really significant stepping stones on the path to human-level intelligence. So that's one of the reasons I didn't really expand on that in the talk, but that's yet another reason why we are so excited about world modeling going forward. However, you're also right that if you think about world modeling as a way, for example, to plan, we don't necessarily need like full realistic-looking generation, right? We should be able to do this in a latent space, and I think that's also going to be quite exciting to see to what extent we can then at some point repurpose these foundational world models for planning and agents without necessarily needing to decode into this kind of high-dimensional pixel space.
Thank you.
And this would be last question.
Hi, so I'm curious about the variance property of generative models. So I think in my own research and others on generalization and robustness, we've seen a lot that models can interpolate really well and generate novel things. But at the same time, you lose a lot of density in like the tails of your distribution, and you might not be able to extrapolate really and form really novel outputs. So what does it mean then when you train with this data, right? Like you have a lot of, there's some maybe mode collapse that's still going on. And if you train on that, your training environment might be varied, but still very constrained in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great great remark. I think honestly we just don't know yet, right? So we know from reinforcement learning there's reward hacking. Now, when we train, let's say, an RL agent in a world model, there might be other forms of like environment hacking, right, where it just moves the world model into some really obscure, out of distribution representational space. I think we should try. I don't know. I just don't know yet where that will take us and what the limitations are going to be.
Yeah. It has been wonderful. The talk has resulted in a lot of open-ended questions, but some of those will have to wait. I encourage you all to find Tim today at the poster session, Balrog, right? And tomorrow at the workshops. In the meantime, let's give him a huge round of applause for the thought-provoking talk.